Now, the state of Florida is suing the Biden administration over its immigration policy at the southern border as more migrants and refugees from Haiti, Afghanistan, and elsewhere enter the state. Do they have legitimate asylum claims? And how is the Biden administration's immigration policy affecting national security? Joining us to discuss this and much more, former Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, thanks for being with us. I want to begin with Florida. Attorney General Ashley Moody announced this lawsuit Tuesday, claiming the Biden administration's immigration policy is illegal. Now, following that announcement, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis had this to say at a press conference. Watch.
The state of Florida is suing the Biden administration over its unlawful and destructive catch and release policy. They want a massive illegal migration into this country, and it's obvious in the policies that they're choosing. They don't talk about the destination of the people that are being resettled in Florida, and they don't talk about the number who have been resettled in Florida who have been COVID positive. So they don't tell us a lot of stuff. They don't say whether they have a criminal record. They don't say whether they've failed to appear for their removal proceedings. And we're entitled to know, given that we bear the cost of most of this with our services, our criminal justice system, our education system.
Ken, first, your reaction to this lawsuit, and do these governors actually have a right to any of this information?
Well, whether I don't recall a statute that would give them a right to the information per se, but more importantly, there is a statute that says that the Department of Homeland Security will essentially detain people who come into the country illegally until their status is determined. That means they will not be released. So on the fundamental question of whether catch and release is legal or not, they're in a very good position to at least be able to make an argument for that based on a federal statute. They can claim quite clearly that Joe Biden, as president, is not abiding by federal law.
And that's by allowing these people just to come into the country, really with just they don't even have a schedule to appear before court order.
Right.
It's just a kind of check-in with authorities at some point order, which is I've never heard of, Ken. What is this? Where did this come from?
I mean, honestly, Raymond, I think that the only purpose of it is so they can tell you and me and the rest of America, well, we've got them coming back in. We're staying in touch with them. I mean, it is truly about that useful. And we have seen a big difference between what this administration says to the American people and what they do. All of us tell our kids, right? Actions speak louder than words. And their actions and their omissions, they have an open door policy. They're inviting people to come in illegally. And then when they do catch and detain any, they release them. And that is the focus of the Florida lawsuit. Attorney General Moody is in a very good position to move forward on this, and it'll be interesting to see how the federal judges handle it.
Ken, Ron DeSantis also signed an order prohibiting state agencies from assisting the relocation of these undocumented immigrants arriving in his state. How effective do you think that tactic is, and how do you think the administration might respond to that?
So I don't think it'll be very effective. However, I would say that intentional resettlement, which is usually, by the way, done just with refugees. We never resettled illegal aliens. This is a planned effort that starts before they come in the country, and with 9, including one Catholic at least, resettlement agencies and so forth. That is not what's happening with these illegal aliens coming over the border. That instead of using our taxpayer dollars to repatriate them and deport them home, they're using our taxpayer dollars to fly and bus them around the country without regard, by the way, for their COVID status frequently. And so because that cooperation isn't taking place already, I don't know that it'll have a lot of practical effect. What it will do is for the illegals themselves, when they end up in a particular community, it may take them longer to sort of connect up with the community in any way that they might, like get a driver's license for those states that allow such things. I don't think Florida is one. But those kinds of logistical things that often take place just as a function of living life.
Ken, Florida is not the only place in the U.S. suing this administration over their policies at the border. Valverde County in Texas, which saw about 30,000 migrants earlier this month, has said it's going to unite with neighboring counties to sue the Biden administration to push for more enforcement at the border. Do you expect to see more of these lawsuits from these states along the southern border or counties along the southern border?
I do, for two reasons. One substantive and one more appearance, and I don't mean to make that sound shallow. But one, the substantive one, is they're looking for any way at all to protect themselves, to protect their school budgets, to protect their communities from the crime that comes along with this, both petty and more severe. They're looking for ways. So those are the substantive ones. And then the appearance ones, which are important, though not as important as actual accomplishment, is the fact that it points up the desperation. It puts a human and a community picture on the devastation that Joe Biden has invited on this country. And for your viewers, I'd invite them to look at Article 4, Section 4 of their Constitution, which is the federal government's commitment to protect every state from invasion. At least the border states, the federal government isn't even attempting to keep that commitment. And so these localities are desperate. You know, last year their school board expected X number of students. Well, now we've got thousands more that we never expected and don't speak English and so forth. The cost and burden of that is utterly destructive of the people already in their community.
This week, former President Barack Obama even seemed to suggest that the Biden administration's border policies were not working. Here's what he told ABC in an interview.
Immigration is tough. It always has been, because on the one hand, I think we are naturally a people that wants to help others. At the same time, we're a nation state. We have borders. The idea that we can just have open borders is something that I think, as a practical matter, is unsustainable.
Now, Ken, Obama's criticism here is a departure from what we've been hearing from the administration, which is that the border is secure and it's closed. Your reaction?
Well, first of all, I don't often say this, but from start to finish, I agree with every word President Obama just said, just as he said it, including the comments about our generosity and the tug between being a country of laws and a sovereign nation and our desire to help people. We have all of that in this country. I agree completely. I also agree that that is a departure. He is now sounding a bit of, that's very subtle, but when former President Obama is noting that we have a crisis at the border, effectively, implicitly, that is quite contrary to the rhetoric that I mentioned earlier that we're hearing from this administration that you just noted. The border's closed, it's secure, nothing to see here, folks, move along, move along. That is not the situation at the border. It is a disaster, it is a crisis, and it affects every community in America, both in terms of, say, drugs and the populations and their schools, and human trafficking.
Well, Ken, look, I was in Del Rio. I was also in Arizona last week. They are being inundated. They don't know what to do. They just don't have the manpower. I mean, according to the U.S. Border Patrol, 200,000 migrants were received at the U.S. border in August alone. The administration's now scrambling to reassemble the Trump Remain in Mexico policy, which said, you know, people had to stay in Mexico to await their status and to be invited in. Biden dismantled that policy. Now he's trying to pick up the pieces. Is it possible, or have they lost Mexico, which is what I'm being told?
Well, we'll see. I mean, that required cooperation from Mexico. And you remember 2.5 years ago, President Trump was very rough in the relationship there, in the negotiation with Mexico to get them to a point of cooperation. But I will say this. When that point of cooperation was achieved, we had never worked better with our Mexican partners, friends, and allies to stem the flow of illegal immigration. And the Remain in Mexico program was the most successful program of all. And it ties in, by the way, to your first subject matter, and that is the Florida lawsuit, because that was the alternative for us to detention in this country, was for cooperation with Mexico to hold them in Mexico until we could process their immigration claims, which, by the way, were overwhelmingly false and fraudulent. And that is as determined by career immigration officers, not political appointees, who also judge all our other cases. And we're approving those cases that were coming up through Mexico across the border at a much lower rate than all the others we deal with, because they didn't have a good legal claim.
Yeah, let's talk about those asylum claims for a minute. Many of these Haitian migrants who came, they claimed that they had a refugee status. But many of them were living in Chile for 8 years. I mean, they had ID cards. They threw a lot of those at the Rio Grande when they entered the country. Do they actually have an asylum claim? And would you say the same about the other people who are streaming across the Rio Grande?
So when you look at the Haitians, you're absolutely right. Chile, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, they were living in other parts of South and Central America for years. And, people may ask themselves, or if you haven't, you would ask themselves, how did so many people from one country who really haven't been part of the rush of the border for the last 8 months all suddenly show up at the same time? With nothing happening in Haiti, by the way, to be a catalyst. And the answer is, you look closely at the pictures, they all have cell phones, they're communicating through social networks and so forth, and they all decided to come because Joe Biden has made it clear that the border is open and they can walk across. And that's what they're seeing, frankly, in Del Rio. Yes, they have to live through a rather squalid third world looking camp for a few weeks, but this administration buckled, and it isn't even buckling. They want them in. This is an intentional policy. It's not an accident. And the Haitians are just the latest to take advantage of it. But in terms of getting asylum, because they'd established themselves somewhere else, they don't qualify for asylum. And frankly, most of the other folks coming to that border overwhelmingly don't qualify for asylum. Let's look at Central America. This isn't the 1980s anymore. They have governments in all three countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, that are working very hard to protect their people and provide them opportunities. That's not what was happening in the 80s, which is sort of people's picture of Central America and the potential for asylum. These are true democracies that just have lesser economies than ours now. And so we'd be better off focusing on getting them trade opportunities and growing their economies, but returning their citizens back to their country when they come into ours illegally.
Ken, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas visited that site in Texas where thousands of migrants, most of them Haitian, have been for over a week. More are now coming. We're seeing reports of another flood of Haitian migrants coming. Again, there's nothing driving this. There's no immediate crisis driving this. But listen to Mayorkas.
If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned. Your journey will not succeed.
Ken Cuccinelli, is that true? At least 12,000 Haitians who came here last week, they've already been resettled in America.
Right. If it were true, they'd stop coming. Lines like that, and we've heard them from Jen Psaki, we've seen them from Vice President Harris, they are not true. They know they are not true. They seem to have no problem saying these words, which are untrue, and they're doing it so they can say, hey, we said don't come. This is purely for media presentation, and nobody believes them. Democrats, their voters don't believe them. That's what the polling has shown since the spring. So this is it's not even a good act for show, but that's all it's for. It is for show. That's also why that Remain in Mexico program was so important to us, is because it isn't enough to say you're going to not let people in this country. People back in these source countries have to know it's true, because people need to start showing back up in those neighborhoods because they couldn't get in the United States.
And we should qualify all of this by saying nobody lets more immigrants into the United States of America in an orderly, legal fashion than the United States of America. So it's not that we're saying close up the, close all the gates.
Year after year, including under President Trump.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I mean, everybody has to understand this in context and realize what we're seeing here. Very quickly, Ken, Title 42. This was that health rule that President Trump invoked when COVID hit to turn people away at the border, saying, wait a minute, we don't know your COVID status, so for the safety of our citizenry, you can't come in. So it was a way to instantly turn them away. Biden said, we're not doing that any longer. Now he's going to court trying to get Title 42 reinstated. Your reaction to this kind of back and forth over Title 42?
They have, so this is the public health order from the CDC about the border. It's rather obvious. I mean, people come up in these human trafficking rings run by the drug cartels, most evil, vicious people in the Western Hemisphere, in what are human petri dish conditions, all jammed into trucks and stash houses. It is perfect for the spread of a communicable disease. And that is happening, as we know, when on those limited occasions when we get information about COVID status, it's high positivity rates. They're being moved on anyway. They're also coming from countries with low vaccination rates. Not that that stops the spread, but it ameliorates the impact when people do get sick. And so this is a critical source of new variants and new cases into this country. And the hypocrisy of this administration in terms of how they're effectively cracking down hard on American citizens over COVID. At the same time, they're literally casting aside any rules, requirements, or restrictions for people who come in here illegally. It's incredible. At some point, you're going to see an inequality claim in these COVID cases where a citizen's going to say, I'm not being treated the same as an illegal immigrant. It'll be one of the claims.
Yeah, well, but when you're talking about charging people, and I'm going to get to this later in the show, when you're talking about penalizing companies $700,000 for not having a fully vaccinated staff, and you're throwing open the gates of the country and saying, come on in, everybody, that's a huge problem here. Ken, I've got to hit this. 177 faith-based organizations and almost 2,000 faith leaders have written a letter to the Biden administration expressing their dismay with the resumption of these deportation flights to Haiti. Now, there are only a limited number of them. They didn't. It's not like they deported, 20,000 people. They didn't, or all 15,000 that came in the first wave. We already know 12,000 are in country. Is there a profit motive here for some of these faith-based organizations where they earn millions in refugee resettlement and loan commissions?
Yeah, so there are so-called nonprofits that are paid to do refugee resettlement. That's how it is accomplished in this country. And that has been that way for a while, including, I want to say Catholic Charities is one of the ones with contracts. And so that is a real possibility. But it's also the use of religion to achieve political goals here. It's the Catholic Catechism has a paragraph on immigration, and it says rich nation, and I'm paraphrasing, rich nations should be generous. Well, you and I talked about how generous America already is, but that the migrants have to respect the laws and customs of the place they're going. And that's not happening here. That is not happening here. So, and it hasn't for years. The illegal migrants to this country don't qualify on traditional faith expectation bases to come into the country. They just don't.
In a recent Pew Center poll, the majority of Americans are not confident that the Biden administration is properly vetting these Afghan refugees who have come to the U.S. 27% said they were, quote, not too confident. Another 28% said they're not confident at all. The White House has said it's expecting to resettle up to 95,000 Afghans in the United States. Now, look, Ken, there's a natural instinct, especially here. We've been talking about it throughout. People want to help refugees and migrants coming here. But are all these asylum claims, the Afghan asylum claims, are they legitimate? And what kind of national security issues might this raise?
So asylum is for people who arrive here. We're importing these folks. So to the extent they come, it should be as refugees, which is the same legal standard, but it's discretionary. I mean, we're literally flying people into this country. So open borders is they don't stop them from coming here. We're literally importing them. And we're going to have a civil society problem with this population. We are close culturally, but to the vast number of people who even come illegally over our southern border. That is not the case with the Afghanis. And the Pew Foundation did a longitudinal study several years back. 61% of these folks believe that you and I, non-Muslims, should have to live under Sharia law. 79% think stoning to death is an appropriate punishment for adultery, and almost 40% think that it's acceptable under some circumstances to use suicide bombings in defense of Islam. These are not consistent with basic American principles. We're a country of immigrants, we're a melting pot, but only if you're willing to melt in and adopt our values, and those values are reflected in the Constitution, including the First Amendment, and that is not consistent with this population that is not being vetted as they come in. That's a terrible mix with the Homeland Security risks that we're taking by bringing this population in here.
Final question, Ken. Is there any consideration being given to Christian Afghanis looking to come to the U.S.? I mean, according to Open Doors World Watch list, Afghanistan's the second worst country for Christians in the world. Why are they given no priority? I mean, it seems to me they have an actual claim of persecution and refugee status, certainly more than the Haitians or you know, a guy who just happened to work for the Afghan military and got paid handsomely for a few weeks.
Yeah, so the one group there that I think most Americans are supportive of coming are those who did help us in Afghanistan, but that's a very small number. The number of Christians also small, but living under the Taliban is deadly dangerous. There are groups, unfortunately, not including our own government, who are below the radar working to get Christians out of Afghanistan, and they're trying to stay below the radar because it's not safe for either them or their charges to be learned about. And, you know, as much as people might, you know, pat them on the back, say good job, they're trying to focus on their mission. And I'm familiar with a number of these folks, and God bless them, they're doing a lot of good work. And but it is hard and challenging when the main place you'd look for help, the U.S. government, turns its back on you. And that is what this administration has done for Christians in Afghanistan, frankly, much like many of our own citizens.
No, it's a heartbreaker. We destabilize the region, and then we leave them to die. And and as we talked about, the vetting is not where it should be. It takes months to a year to vet these people. We're vetting them in minutes and days now. It's absurd. Ken Cuccinelli, wish we had more time. We'll leave it there. You can follow Ken at Ken Cuccinelli on Twitter. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond. Good to be with you.